Okay, I think we can get started. We have about 12 attendees in the community meeting right now. So good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this virtual community meeting and EIR scoping meeting. My name is Nuna Nguyen, and I am the Environmental Project Manager with the City of San Jose's Planning Division. Before we get started, I just wanted to go over some information about how the meeting will be conducted and how you can participate. So when you enter the meeting, you will automatically placed on mute. During open forum, you will be unmuted one at a time if you would like to speak. If you have joined by phone, you will be prompted to press *9 on your phone. And if you've joined by computer, tablet, or cell phone, you will be prompted to press the raise hand feature located at the bottom of your screen for us to unmute you. And you can access the agenda via the link provided in the postcard notice that was mailed to you or by following the instructions on the screen. Please refer to page 5 of the agenda, which outlines the code of conduct for this meeting. And please adhere to this code. And this meeting is being recorded, and the recording will be available upon request. And lastly, this is a community and scoping meeting. It is not a public hearing. Therefore, no approval or denial of the project will take place today. Property owners and tenants within 1,000 feet of the project site will be mailed a public hearing notice at least 10 days prior to the hearing date. And if you are outside that area but would like to receive all future notices regarding this project, you may email me at the email address listed on the meeting notice or the agenda, and I'll also provide that information at the end of tonight's meeting. So next, I wanted to go over to review the agenda for tonight's meeting. First, introductions. From city staff, we have myself and Laura Maurer, the project planner. And we have David Keon and Sanhira Kosal, the supervising planners. We have Ryan Sheelan and John Wilson, planners with City of San Jose Airport, as well as environmental consultants from David J. Powers and Associates, John Hessler and Michael Lisenby. And we would first start the presentation off by presenting on the project's background. Then Laura will present the general plan amendment and zoning processes, followed by the project overview. I will then present the environmental review process for the project. And finally, we'll open it up to comments and questions from the public. So first, I am going to pass the presentation over to Ryan, who will discuss the project's background.
Thanks, New. Ryan Sheelan, planner for Airport Planning Development, San Jose International Airport, and the Airport PM for this project. So just a little bit about the background here. So if you can see on the graphic here on the right, the area outlined in green is known as the Guadalupe Gardens. And you'll also see the area outlined in red is the proposed project as is presented in the NOP. And you'll also see this yellow graphic is from Caltrans Aeronautics state aviation law, and it's the inner safety zone that's further detailed in the NOP. And so we are directly under the flight path for San Jose International Airport, just to the south of the airport. We're west of Highway 87, as you can see, and east of Coleman Ave. This property here in the Guadalupe Gardens actually used to entirely be a residential neighborhood. It was referred to the Coleman Loop many decades ago. The city did undertake a land acquisition program from the 1960s to the 1990s and purchased all of this property, which was over 600 parcels, 800 dwelling units. We did purchase it with the assistance of FAA grant funding, Federal Aviation Administration. And the purpose was for airport noise compatibility and approach protection purposes. And every one of the parcels in the Guadalupe Gardens, again, which is outlined in green, is encumbered with FAA grant restrictions. So when the city takes a grant from the FAA, we agree to a set of restrictions, which are essentially called grant assurances. And I do want to mention that aviation and compatibility with aviation is the controlling objective of these lands here in the Guadalupe Gardens. New, can you go ahead to the next slide? All right. So again, we'll see the same graphic. We're going to see it in these next slides here too. So I want to make an important distinction on this property. And contrary to how some people envision this land out here, it's actually not parkland. While it might look like and feel like parkland, if you've ever been out here, similar to other parks in the city, it's actually federally obligated land, which primary purpose is for aircraft approach protection and noise compatibility. So for safety and noise purposes. And actually consistent with the land's primary purpose, which I mentioned is aviation, the area is designated currently as open space for passive recreational uses. And that was in the city's 2002 Guadalupe Gardens master plan. And so as a part of this project, we will be amending the Guadalupe Gardens master plan to remove these parcels. The parcels that were selected, as you can see, are on the outskirts of the garden, separated from, from some of the other recreational uses. These parcels have been fallow for almost 20 years now. Nothing has been developed on this property. And so that kind of leads us to the point of this project. We've received direction from the FAA. Again, as I mentioned earlier, that we did receive federal grant funds over the years, and it's federally obligated land to develop this land along Coleman Ave and Heading Street, which does have, which is desirable for certain commercial development. And so we will activate this land out here with this commercial development, which will complement some of the other uses out there in the Guadalupe Gardens. And it will serve as another means to generate revenue to support aviation services at the airport. Next slide, please. Yeah. And then last off, again, we've got the same graphic on the right. This is right out of the NOP. There are a host of restrictions and regulations that apply to this property, at all levels, from local to state to federal. So on the local level, obviously, we have City of San Jose and Santa Clara County. The Santa Clara County does have an Airport Land Use Commission, which certain projects in the city are referred to the Airport Land Use Commission. At the state level, was Caltrans Division of Aeronautics, and at the federal level, the FAA. The Santa Clara County Airport Land Use Commission, or ALUC, has prepared a comprehensive land use plan specifically for SJC. ALUCs and comprehensive land use plans are all over California at every public use airport. And so in this comprehensive land use plan, the plan establishes noise criteria, density criteria, building size, and height criteria, which need to be followed. Additionally, in the NOP, there is a potential list of land uses that will be included in the rezoning effort and have been very carefully looked at to be compatible with the property and the restrictions at local, state, and federal level. And with that, I will pass it back to Nu. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Next, Laura will be giving an overview of the project and explaining the general plan amendment and zoning processes.
Thanks, Nu. Yeah, as Nu mentioned, I am the project manager for the general plan amendment and for the plan development rezoning of the sites that were specified. But before we get into some more of the details, I just want to give sort of a brief overview of what is a general plan land use designation, what is a general plan amendment, and then we'll go into the more of the specifics. So every city has what is called a general plan, which is basically an official document that lays out the policies, goals, and strategies for a city looking forward into the future on what the city would like to see in the city. Our current general plan is called the Envision San Jose 2040 General Plan. It was adopted in 2011, and it envisions how the city will change up to 2040. Next slide, please. One of the things that are included in the general plan document is a list of all the different general plan land use designations. So each property in the city and in other areas like in our sphere of influence, other areas in the county, in case they get annexed into the city also have general plan land use designations. And these are basically describing what kind of uses are allowed on the site, as well as the density of any housing that might be built, if it's allowed, and sort of the size of the structures that are built on the property. Oh, sorry, can we go back? Thank you. And so as we can see just briefly, there's a lot of certain colors on here. It's maybe a little hard to see the map legend, but the yellow is for single family homes, which is a predominant land use type that's throughout the city. And the like kind of light green is open hillside, which is meant to be sort of left to be open. And we'll go into more specifics on the particular parcels that we're looking at in the next few slides. Next slide, please. Thank you. And we're going to be looking at two different things. So we have the general plan land use designation and then also the zoning of the property. And so they're kind of similar, but they're a little different. Like we said, the general plan land use designation sort of dictates allowed uses. And then certain standards like density and FAR, which is floor area ratio. But the zoning kind of effectuates the general plan, and it goes into much more details of the actual specific uses that are allowed, and a lot of the development standards like setbacks and number of parking spaces, how large the lots need to be. So it gets a little more specific. And another important thing to note is just that in 2018, there was a California Senate Bill 1333 that was passed. And what it does is it requires that the zoning district be conforming with the general plan land use designation. So for a long time in the city of San Jose, a lot of times they weren't conforming. So now anytime somebody changes the general plan, if the zoning doesn't conform to the general plan, they also need to do a rezoning. Next slide, please. So the general plan amendment is basically when somebody comes into the city and they say, hey, we want to change the general plan land use designation on our site. And there's a longer process for that. It gets reviewed by the city. It also has to go through CEQA clearance, which is what we're going to be talking about later in the meeting as well. And then we have community meetings to inform the public. And then it will go to Planning Commission and then to City Council for approval. Next slide, please. So we'll go into a little bit about more details on the site specifically. Next slide, please. So kind of as Ryan had showed in his picture before, but a little more close up on here, there's a look at the different parcels that are incorporated into the general plan amendment and to the plan development rezoning. We can see that there are 7 different parcels. There are also a couple areas that are labeled A, B, C, and D. So there are 2 street vacations that are included on this. So they don't look like streets right now. Obviously, they're not used as roads, but legally they are still considered rights of way. So these are going to be vacated essentially, and they're going to be added to the parcels that are adjacent to them. So like the letter D will be added to parcel 2, letter C to parcel A. And so those will be included alongside the parcels that are listed on the site. And then also parcel number 4, only part of the site is actually being included in the general plan amendment and the rezoning. And we'll show that on the next slide. We can move to that. Thank you. So we've sort of lumped all of the parcels into specific sites to make it a little easier to work through. So site 1 includes parcel 6, site 2, parcel 7. 3 is site C3 is sort of the big one where we've included parcels 1, 2, 5, and all of the street vacations. And then you can see for site 4, we've removed the portion of parcel 4 that's no longer going to be included with the changes and included with parcel number 3. So altogether, we have about 11.37 acres of land that's going to be changed. And as Ryan had alluded to before, all the sites are currently vacant. Next slide, please. So on the map, what you'll see here is the current general plan land use designation. The vast majority of these sites are have the open space, parkland, and habitat general plan land use designation, which makes sense because this was part of the Guadalupe Gardens area, and open space, parkland, and habitat land use designation is intended to be open space, parks, and other sort of natural habitats. There are two small sections on Site 5 that has light industrial general plan land use designation, and these are possibly holdovers from the past when these sites used to have buildings on it before the airport bought the land on these sites. These are light industrial is meant for sort of industrial uses, but ones that have like non-hazardous materials or doesn't cause any sort of nuisance effects. So this is usually more along the line of like warehousing or wholesaling or other kinds of light manufacturing. Next slide, please. So in the proposal from the airport, they are proposing to change all of these sites to the CIC Combined Industrial Commercial General Plan Land Use Designation. This is sort of a mix of commercial and industrial, similar to more like light industrial stuff. It does not include sort of heavy industrial sort of with hazardous materials or any other kinds of nuisances. And it has a little bit of flexibility that you can get a little bit of both. It has a FAR of up to 12. And then we can, next slide, please. So that from there we can talk about the zoning districts. Here we get a little bit more varied in what is on the sites currently. So, and some of this is remnants from when the sites, before the sites had been purchased. These are kind of left over from them. So a lot of it is still, again, open space, which makes sense considering most of this area already is a park and has the open space, parkland, and habitat general plan land use designation. But again, we have some of those areas that also have the light industrial, which again are this similar uses, sort of warehouses, commercial kitchens, wineries, auto repair. And then a small section of it has the R2 two-family residence zoning district, which would allow housing at about 8 to 16 dwelling units to the acre. And it only allows 1 and 2 family residences with very limited commercial uses. But if we want to make this conforming to the new general plan land use designation, we need to update that. So next slide, please. So the new proposed zoning district is actually something that we call a planned development zoning district. So these are a little bit different than your standard zoning districts. These we consider sort of custom zoning districts. So it usually is based off of a standard one, but kind of changes things a little bit than what we have in our standard. So this is considered an open space plan development. It's actually going to be using the CIC Combined Industrial Zoning District standards with some other limitations to it to help it conform to the FAA intersafety zone regulations. But if the PD zoning is not effectuated by having a PD permit, it will stay as the OS or the open space zoning district until that happens. So it'll stay open space until another permit comes in to actually start building what's listed through the zoning district. So some of the differences from the CIC zoning district is going to be a little bit to what Ryan alluded to, is that there are going to be some limitations on the kinds of uses that are allowed to make sure that they are compatible with the intersafety zone regulations. And a lot of these are going to be limiting the number of people and making sure that there's no hazardous materials in any of the uses that are allowed. There's also going to be some different height restrictions, and a lot of this again is related to the airport approach zone and what is necessary for the aircraft. And then in addition, there's some open space requirements for the development of these sites. And you can learn more about this by reading the NOP and getting some more details on those informations. And now I'll hand that back to New.
Thank you, Laura. Now I'll be going over the environmental impact report scoping process for the project. So for today's scoping meeting, I'll be explaining what the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, is, go over the Environmental Impact Report, or EIR, process for the project, provide information about how to give additional comments on the scope of the EIR, and also to receive your comments and feedback on what we have scoped out for the EIR analysis. So CEQA requires that state and local agencies disclose and evaluate the significant environmental impacts of proposed projects and to adopt all feasible mitigation measures to reduce or eliminate those impacts. And in compliance with CEQA, an EIR is being prepared for the project, and an EIR analyzes the proposed project's impacts on the environment and identifies any mitigation measures if there are any significant impacts that are identified. And an EIR would also look at alternatives to the proposed project that could avoid or lessen the identified significant impacts, as well as analyzing any cumulative impacts that the project may have. This flow chart shows the EIR preparation and review process. The boxes in blue indicate opportunities for the public to submit comments related to the EIR. And currently we have circulated the notice of preparation, which was the NOP that Ryan and Laura had been mentioning, which is step one of an EIR for the project. And we circulated that on August 21st. The NOP explains the project background and the project description in detail, and explains the scope of the environmental analysis for the project, which includes impact analysis for resource areas such as aesthetics, air quality, biological resources, cultural resources, and tribal cultural resources, hazards, land use planning, and more. The public has 30 days to review the scope of work of the EIR described in the NOP, and the city will accept comments on the scope of the EIR, which is comments on the NOP, until 5 p.m. on Tuesday, September 19th of this year. And you can submit your comments on the NOP to me, and this is my contact information for you to submit, which is also going to be at the end slide. Okay. So now we will open the meeting up for public comment. You can use the raise hand feature on Zoom or press *9 on your phone to let staff know you would like to speak. Staff will call out the name or the last 4 digits of your phone number, so please unmute yourself when you hear yourself speak, and each speaker will have, I don't think we're timing today, but yeah, please share your comments on this presentation.
All right, calling Juan Estrada.
Hi, earlier there was a reference to the fact that some of the parcels were not parkland. And as I understand it, parkland is a City of San Jose definition that is currently being reviewed. And so I believe on November 1st, the City's Parks Commission will consider an interpretation of it. But all of that to say that it's a City of San Jose designation. It's not a federal designation unless that's what you mean. So what I'm trying to figure out is, do you mean that the federal government would prohibit the use of those parcels as parkland should the city decide to do that? And so that's why they're not parkland. And I think that's the main thing. So for example, would the federal government prohibit the use of those as passive recreational use, parks, trails, open space? Is there a prohibition, and that's why they must be converted to a different type of use? And again, it's my understanding the definition of parkland is currently fuzzy, so it's unclear to me how it was established that they are not yet parkland, if I think that Parks is still going to produce a list and an interpretation of that. And perhaps I'm mistaken, but I think that's my understanding.
Thank you, Juan. I think airport staff, maybe this is best for Ryan.
Yeah, I'm gonna hand this, John Hessler, did you want to take this?
Sure. This goes back to, as Ryan explained, the underlying purpose of the land. And as Ryan mentioned, all these parcels are encumbered by the federal grant restrictions from the FAA that the city agreed to when the land was purchased. So what that means is that even though the parcels are owned by the city of San Jose, the city is prohibited from doing activities or construction on the land that is not approved by the FAA. So you might ask, well, why are we proposing to change from open space to retail or commercial activities on these sites? The answer is it is at the specific request of the FAA. The FAA has a policy that lands that it has been that lands that have had federal monies used for purchase, but are not being used to their full potential, they must be developed in a way such that revenue is generated for aviation purposes, because that's the underlying purpose of the land. So that is what is driving all of this on these parcels, is the FAA's direction that these lands, in FAA's opinion, are not being used to their full potential by just being open space. And so they have requested the city to allow for development and revenue generated on those parcels, consistent with the other restrictions that Ryan talked about from the Airport Land Use Commission.
Does that answer question one?
I think so. I think then that the parkland designation reference is immaterial, because I think what you're saying is the FAA is forcing you to change it. And even if you chose to use it as parkland, the FAA would object. And it sounds like you're saying the FAA has the power to force the city to do it. The city could not say no.
I think that is a true statement. I mean, this is FAA, a national policy. The FAA is doing this at multiple locations around the country. There's a concern that lands that were purchased using aviation funds are not being used to their full potential, which the FAA interprets through its mission from Congress that things we're not getting, taxpayers are not getting full return on their investment of these lands. And so the FAA is asking airports to correct that deficiency. And the way they have, the method they have to do that is enforcing the grant restrictions. Every one of these parcels, if you go to the county recorder, has deed restrictions and grant restrictions recorded with the parcel. So that is something that has to be adhered to.
Okay, thank you.
And
Thank you,
just
John.
to add one last thing,
Yeah.
the city has a partnership with the FAA for these lands and for the operation of San Jose International, right? So this is an ongoing relationship, and this is the same at all airports across the country. And so the airport owner and operator applies regularly for grants from the FAA as part of the routine operation of the airport. And so It is standard practice for local airport owners and operators to operate in compliance with all the grant restrictions, because failure to do so risks the FAA not granting any future funds for the operation of the airport. So it's a long-term relationship that has entered into.
Thank you, John. So I'm going to go to the next person. We're going to go through comments, and then Juan, if you have any more questions, you could come back up and raise your hand again. So I'm going to Corey Addison. Please talk.
Hey, good evening. Thank you so much. So touching again, I think on the what is going to be allowed on these parcels to be developed, and kind of how it is interpreted as revenue, beneficial to aviation purposes. Is that an interpretation that these developments would be airport services or airport related businesses, or is it that any development on this land would be paying like a parcel tax or something similar to the FAA?
So I think this is again Ryan. Or
yeah, I'll take this. So airport, which is a department of the city, will retain ownership of the land. We will do a lease out for this property, and the list of uses that we came up with were based on the host of restrictions from all the agencies that have consideration of this property. So including FAA, and then we also have state. We have California state law, which also sets additional restrictions. So in this case, it's not going to be just businesses that serve the airport. It's open to any businesses when we enter into a lease agreement that are compatible with the zoning that can go out there, any commercial uses.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Okay. So now I'm going to allow Eric to talk, please. Eric.
I would like to know, I don't know if you guys are aware, 15 years ago, there was a plan, redevelopment agency has a plan to expand the Coleman Avenue between Harding and Taylor by purchasing the property owned by the gas station, the metal shed company, and a few other properties on that side of the street, and to expand that Coleman Avenue to stay aligned with the other two sections that are already completed now. So this is the only stretch. So is there any work with this plan, or is this plan totally forgotten and now this is something new that the city is working with the FAA to develop the land?
Yeah, I think Ryan, you know more about this.
Yeah, I'm gonna hand it to John, because I think, John, you wrote the EIR for the Coleman widening. So John, you're on mute.
Hey, John, I think you're still on mute.
Sorry about that. Eric is correct that the city in its general plan calls for the widening of Coleman to 6 lanes. And environmental impact was prepared in 2006, and that widening is an approved project. It hasn't been implemented yet, primarily because of funding issues, but we are aware of the project as something that is planned in the future. And when you look at the notice of preparation, you'll see notes that we have reserved a 50-foot wide swath of land from each parcel along the east side of Coleman. So we would not be this proposal would not be building anything within that 50-foot buffer because that is land that is anticipated to be used for the Coleman widening.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Eric?
Yeah, I think it answers it. So at least I know what's been planned, because there's no point what do you call that, building something so close to the street and then you cannot widen it when the time comes. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So Jordan Maudo, please speak.
Hi. For everyone here, if you happen to be opposed to this, I would encourage you to try and contact your congressman about this. If this is an FAA issue, for the city staff, I would personally ask that maybe, if any of our council members would like to see this remaining open space, that maybe they can write to Congress as well, or write to the FAA, because this seems really silly to me. Air travel contributes massively to climate change, road widening, which I wasn't aware of before, but if we're widening Coleman, that also contributes to climate change. Green space mitigates climate change. So it seems like this is an extremely productive use of the land to mitigate the problems caused by the FAA and caused by this airport. So to rezone the land just because we want to make more money for the airport, which ruins the environment, that doesn't make sense to me. I know in terms of development, like if we need to develop for a specific use case, infill is going to be better for the environment than, say, going out into the mountains and clearing, old growth forests there. But we're not talking about something that is choosing infill versus developing new land. We're talking about hypothetical developments that haven't even, been envisioned yet, just for the purpose of making money for the FAA. And I don't like hearing that that's the only reason why we need to do this. Also, I don't know the history of this land, so I'm just going off of what was spoken about in the presentation. But it sounds like the land was purchased with the knowledge that it would become the open space Guadalupe Gardens. So I'm very confused how the FAA could say that we're not in compliance with the original terms if the land is being used in the way that it was originally planned to be used when the land was being purchased. So I'm very confused about that. In terms of the actual logistics, if you rezone Site 4, that seems fine to me. Site 4 seems so small and it's already enclosed by other light industrial things. So Zone 4, fine, whatever. Site 3, it's a huge amount of open space. And, again, we say it's not productive because it's not generating rent for the FAA. But, presumably there's wildlife living there. And, so it's perfectly productive for, whatever animals and plants are living there. Sites 1 and 2, they're kind of small. They're also already surrounded by light industrial. So, if those end up being rezoned, it's probably not that big of a deal, but I feel like there's still better things we could use with that land than light industrial. For example, consider our city forest. They have a plot of land, probably similar size, that is north of Site 2. Our city forest, they recently received a commendation from the city because, they're working very hard to mitigate climate change. They plant a ton of trees all around the city. So they have a very productive use of their little plot of land over there by the airport. But they're a nonprofit, so they're, I assume, not generating profit from the FAA. But I feel like with sites 1 and 2, if we need to do something besides leave them open, I feel like we should try and give them to groups that are like our city forest to do, natural things on that land versus just, willy-nilly rezoning so that we can give money to the FAA. Thank you.
Thank you, Jordan. I don't know if Ryan wants to respond or John.
Nothing to add. Thank you
If not,
for your comment.
yeah, if not, thank you, Jordan. Now I am going to allow Lawrence Ames to speak.
Yes, hi. Two questions. One, is there any impact from this thing on the planned airport connector to the Diridon station? I understand it was supposed to go through this area.
Ryan or John?
Yeah, I can comment on that. The airport connector is in a very early phase of feasibility. So at this time, it's not known how these two could potentially integrate if the airport connector does move forward. The next phase of actually developing the airport connector would require city council approval.
But will this impact it or preclude it in any way?
I don't think that's in the scope of this project.
Okay, and the second question is, this area has had a long problem with, how do you phrase it, unauthorized dwelling units back there. And so one of the plans by the city was to have a dog park to help activate the area there. It's just east of this area. I'm kind of wondering if this row of developments would impact that or have any input onto it. Would there be visibility? Would people from the development sites be able to look on the area there, or would the area just become fenced off, blocked off, and left to degrade?
Yeah, I can take that. The dog park is currently under construction. I don't know if you can go back to the graphic. It's currently under construction to the east of this property. So this property will not impact it. In fact, one of the goals of this project is to be complementary to those future uses, which are both under construction and planned for the future. So the dog park is currently under construction just north of Asbury. Yeah, there you go. Just north of Asbury, west of Spring Street, currently under construction right now.
Okay, thank you.
And the goal is it's not to fence it off. It's for them to be complementary.
Thank you.
Thank you. So now I am going to go on and unmute Jason Su. Jason, you're allowed to talk now.
Thank you, David. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jason Su with the Guadalupe River Park Conservancy. I actually want to, I have a few questions to ask. Ryan, we're going in the direction that I was hoping that perhaps there's some context, some background as to why this project is moving forward that I think would be helpful in terms of how these sites were selected, in regards to ongoing conversations with the FAA, with fair market value, community benefit designation, things like that. Because I think that was something that is missing in terms of like the reason behind it. My two other questions, one is spurred by a previous speaker, Jordan, in terms of what type of uses are there. In the document that mentioned a list of uses that range from commercial kitchen to laundromat to nursery. There's such a range as to how can we help determine that whatever uses are that do go in there are park serving. My last question is actually the open space plan development is a newer kind of concept, and I think that's mentioned in the presentation. It says 30% open space. Is that defined as planting areas and recreational features, or does that just mean no structures, which means parking lots? And I can repeat the questions.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. I'll start with question one, which you had mentioned regarding fair market value and community benefit. So part of the bigger discussion, and we talked about the history with this property and why we acquired it for approach protection and noise compatibility, was that when it gets to, it's been some time since we acquired it, to the point where regulations have changed and we don't necessarily need all of this property for approach protection or for noise compatibility. Something can go there that would be compatible with the noise. The discussion is that any use out here would have to pay fair market value, and you brought up community benefit, Jason, in that we've had several conversations with the FAA regarding community benefit, which would significantly reduce or potentially eliminate that need for any uses out here to pay fair market value. And where that all comes together, and I think you're alluding to this, Jason, is there's a lot of existing uses out there today which are compatible with the underlying purpose of land for aviation purposes, for noise compatibility, such as the Rotary Play Garden, such as the historic orchard. So we are moving in that direction with the goal that those uses would never be subject to fair market value, but that is something that is still being considered by the FAA.
You. And Jason, you had some questions about what uses are allowed to.
Yeah, my second question is about uses. Given there's the height limits, there's the hazardous materials limits, and the zoning uses are such a diverse spread of. I'm just going through dry cleaning, nursery, office, retail, art studio, winery. Like, these are pretty broad.
Laura, did you want to take a stab at it? Or Ryan?
I guess this is Sanhita Gojal, planner 4 in the general plan team. So the way this zoning has been set up right now is like what you said, Jason. I think it's broad and open, and any of these uses can come in and get appropriate permit and then get situated there. Now, I do not know if Ryan has any additional thoughts on which ones could be park serving, or would there be additional layer from their end or anybody else's end to choose some use over other. But from the zoning regulation perspective, all of these uses that you are seeing here could be possibly there with appropriate types of permits. Ryan, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, the only thing to add, as we mentioned, is the goal is for these uses to be compatible or complementary to the passive recreational uses that are already out there. However, we narrowed down the list from everything that could be possibly eligible to things that we thought would be reasonable, also without eliminating all the options, right? I mean, we'll have to go to the next step and with an RFP and market feasibility and what the interest is out there. There's a whole host of restrictions, as we've talked about, on this property that are not applicable to your typical commercial development.
And that's a good segue to the 30% requirement, Ryan. That comes from FAA's regulation.
No, the 30% actually comes from the Santa Clara County Airport Land Use Commission, the comprehensive land use plan. So that's based off California state law. So it's basically no structures is the answer to your question, and 30% of the site needs to be open space.
So no structures, open space is includes a parking lot. I just wanted to clarify that. Like, what
correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Oops. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So Juan Estrada, you still have your hand up. Did you have another comment? If you do, I'm going to allow you to talk. So Juan, do you have additional comments or questions? If not, then please put your hand down. Juan, if you have any comments or questions. Okay, I guess still hand up. But if is there anybody else that has any comments or questions, please raise your hand and I will unmute you. Okay.
Hey, David, I would just
not seeing anybody. Yeah.
Invite all the participants. There's a lot of questions about, the origin of the land uses and how everything that we're talking about came to be. We tried to lay that out systemically in the NOP and just bring the reader along, and here's the history, here's what happened first, here's what happened next, so that there is an understanding of the history. So I would encourage people who are interested to take a look at the NOP and get up to speed in terms of the questions they have.
Thank you, John. So anybody has any comments or questions, please raise their hand and I will unmute you. Okay, seeing nobody. So New, do you want to take on the conclusion slide and the public and the comment information?
Thank you, David.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So seeing that there are no more hands raised, that concludes the open forum portion of today's meeting. This project is still undergoing review in various city departments, and once the draft EIR for the project is ready, it will be circulated during a public comment period. And when the EIR is finalized and the project review is complete, the project will be scheduled for a planning commission hearing. And the planning commission will make a recommendation to the city council, which is the decision maker. And I encourage everyone to read the NOP. It is on our city's website. Please email me if you need a link to the NOP. And we are accepting comments until September 19th. And when exiting this meeting, you will be prompted to fill out a survey, and the survey will automatically open when we end the meeting if you don't exit out of the internet browser window, and the survey will help us improve our virtual meetings in the future. So thank you in advance for completing it. And finally, here is our contact information for submitting comments. If you received a notice for this hearing, you also received one for the planning commission hearing. And if you didn't receive a notice, but you would like to be notified about this project in the future, please send Laura or I an email. And this concludes tonight's meeting. Thank you everyone for joining us and providing your feedback.
We should keep this slide up for the next few minutes so that people can write down contact information. Thank you.
For any of you that are still here, this is also the city website's page for this development that you can go to, and there'll be more updates coming in the future on this site. It's under the major development projects list under the planning, building, and code enforcement website or webpage, sorry.